Well, folks, welcome to one more edition of Politics and Right. I'm Egberto, Willies, your host. Thank you so kindly for being a part of the show. We have a long show today. It's that I need to get started rather quickly. But beforehand, I want to welcome on our main chat, El Señor AVQ from Brooklyn, New York. Welcome aboard. We also, that's Michael Rudnin. We have an image for the screen. I'll put it on the screen real quick for you, my dear brother. Let me put it on the screen as I continue to say hello to people. Let's see, Donald Gardner. What's up? You, man, fast call. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. Who are you?
I am speaking. How can I help you, sir?
All right. Are you working for Willies Media?
This is Willie's Computer. You're on the live show right now, sir.
Okay. I want to know why I was billed $50 last month.
Maybe you're a subscriber to Egberto Off the Record that you signed up for. I tell you what, can we handle this off record? We don't want to have credit information and that sort of stuff online. So if you go ahead and leave your number, we'll go ahead and make sure and take care of that for you. Okay?
I'm a little confused. Is this a scam?
Oh, no. This is politics done right.
You sound like Egberto.
This is Egberto.
Talking to the real guy?
You're talking to the real guy and you're live on air. I'm telling you.
Fine.
How are you doing? Anything?
Why are we...
Go ahead.
I'm good.
This is our radio show. I am
right.
That comes from the newsletter. I don't know. That's why I said we can do this for you offline for sure. But people who signed up for the newsletter, etc., that's actually the price, the discounted price, I believe that you're looking at. But can we go ahead and talk about that? If you drop a line to this, we can go ahead and send you that information. Is that okay? So I can get the show going?
Yeah, I'll send you a text so you can get back to your work.
Okay, thank you, my brother. You have a good one, okay?
All right, be well.
Take care now. All right, folks, that's interesting. Anyway, welcome aboard Elizabeth Salek LaRue. Welcome aboard Scott McDaniel. Deborah Hamberlin, welcome aboard. Nancy Fagan, welcome aboard. Elizabeth, welcome aboard. Eric Hayes, welcome aboard. Paul Fleming, AVQ. Patrick Magner says, meow. How are you doing? And Eric is in the house. I tell you what, folks, let's go ahead and get it started with, I went ahead and put the income required to keep home payments affordable. That is from Michael that I just put on the screen. What I'd like to do now is go ahead and play the video that we have today. It's a long video, so I have to get it started right this minute, and then we'll take it from there.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever you happenstance in this dialogue with my good friend and a guy I am proud to know. I'm going to introduce Egberto Willies of Politics Done Right, and we are recording on Monday, August 25th, 2025 at approximately noon Egberto's time, because he broadcasts from my old hometown, the great city of H-Town, Texas, and he's in the belly of the beast. And Egberto, I guess I wanted to just welcome you to this side of our conversation, because I've been a guest on your program for several times, but my audience is beginning to expand, and you're in the zeitgeist of so much that's so important that I wanted to tap into. And I thought it would be great to have a conversation. So thank you so much for allowing me your time and your insight and your wisdom. But I just want to start with this. Crazy day, crazy times, crazy month, crazy week, crazy year, everything based on what's happening in your world because of what you're talking about today. I just want to start with what's on your priority list.
First of all, Patrick, I want to thank you for the invite. I want to thank you for appearing on your program. You know, I have a lot of respect for all the work that you've done. I think that what you bring to the independent media, what you bring to history is very important, because the more of us out here doing this kind of work, enlightening our fellow Americans, it's important. For those who, I hope people are taking a look at all that you have produced, very important documentaries out there. Please watch it. It's very important. First of all, thank you again for being on your program. Now that
means a lot to me.
That said, what's on my mind is being positive. What's on my mind is telling our brothers and sisters to not get into that frame of despair as many would have you. I'd like folks to understand that those who are now leading the countries are nothing more than paper tigers. And therefore, if we stand up, if we do what's needed, if we educate ourselves with what a whole lot of good people are putting out there, we will be doing just fine.
Well, I want to convey or just introduce the fact that, like a lot of people I try to interact with, you're a very incredibly smart, dynamic, self-made, driven person that believes in the fundamentals of democracy and liberty and justice and all of those things that have made you who you are. On a professional level, as I recall, I think you're a mechanical engineer. Yes. I know that you share your time doing a lot of different things. You got yourself in this space, and I discovered you years ago, now that I think about it, when you had made some comments about Bernie that I thought were incredibly stimulating and very important. We connected. We have a bit of a history. We've done some great work together. But because you are in Texas, and also, if you wouldn't mind, when you answer this question, just also say, I know you're from Central America initially, and you immigrated to the United States. I can't remember what country specifically. Is it Panama? Panama. Yes. Okay. Well, and Panama is near and dear to my heart especially because of that huge law firm that was in the middle of the Panama Papers and all the money laundering that's involved that makes the global rich in the world move to their places right in your neck of the woods. But you migrate to Texas, which is like the middle of the corporate universe, right? Not to mention the Hollywood, as it were, of the oil and gas industry and the immense power that the military industrial complex that kind of fosters from that, all in this corporate hub of Houston. And many of us are very interested in watching on a razor's edge all of the things that are transpiring from Texas vis-a-vis Texas Governor Abbott and all of the gerrymandering and things. Could you please start with that and comment so we can kind of inside look at the belly of the beast or how things are coming down the pike in Texas?
Yeah, I came from Panama, and I came here on, we came here on a dream, right? We got the propaganda of what America was or what America is. And to tell you the truth, that is what all the reasons that we came here is what America can be. And the people that we have here, I've made great people over the decades that I've been here, that they are in fact America, not because our government and corporations don't behave like what we advertise as America mean we're not. That said, being in Texas, as you said, being in the belly of the beast has always been difficult, but also rewarding. There's a certain thing, and you're from Houston, my brother, and you know that Southern hospitality. There is something to be said about the friendliness, etc., that resides in Texas. No matter where you are, you don't laugh, my brothers. You could be in the midst of a KKK rally, and people say, "How you doing, sir?" Because I've been there. I go with my cameras everywhere, and it's amazing the type of the genteelness that you have in the aggregate over here. So I relay, in as much as it's a state that has a whole lot of problems, that is ultra right wing. The leadership is ultra right wing. That doesn't accurately represent the people of the state, and that is what gives me the positivity that I have that if we can make a change here, the country can actually make a change and be rewarded. We have problems here, and I'm pretty sure you're going to be querying me about some of that going forward.
Well, I'd like to reiterate what you just said. I am definitely from the Lone Star State in my heart and soul because of what you just said. I mean, there's so many beautiful people in the state of Texas, good-natured people. But what's also so inspiring to me, and it always has been, is Texas has always been this can-do state. Now, maybe it gets a little over its sort of itself in terms of the bigness of it all, which I love too, because it's the brashness. It's anything can be done. But, when I grew up in Texas especially, it was kind of the nature of NASA. It was kind of the nature of the medical establishment. It was like the big brains of like big things are possible, right? The biggest things that are in humanity are possible and emanate from, of course, these hubs of these huge financial, commercial, cultural, corporate hubs in Texas that are, of course, Dallas and Houston, Austin and San Antonio now, particularly. I think there's 28 million people in the state of Texas. You get close to 30 million.
Close to 30 million.
Right. And the competitiveness of Texans, of course. But then there's this other side. And what I equate the other side to, especially in the context of we see alligator Alcatraz. We're seeing this, what is it, grizzly Alcatraz, all this kind of stuff that makes me remember back to the 70s, the sort of sense of of humor, but at the same time, that was depicted in one of my favorite films of all time, The Longest Yard. And The Longest Yard was a film about Burt Reynolds, who was this, he fell off the wagon, was a drunk who basically threw a football game because he was an NFL quarterback, and he ends up in prison. But there's this undergirding of the story that there was a fundamental, there's a line you don't cross. And of course, in Texas, it's like, don't mess with Texas. But in the analogy of the football, it's like you don't throw the game. That you compete and you do the integrity and the work and the comradeship and all of those things that equate with, which is this love, quite frankly, for competition, right? But yet in that story, what they were fighting was the corruption of the man. It was the corrupt prison. Who was the guy at the top of the prison?
The warden.
The warden. Sorry. Exactly. So I use that as kind of an analogy to kind of think of Governor Greg Abbott and the corruption that we've seen really naked, right? Over the course of the past, it seems like 15 years of nonstop things out of Texas that just boggle the mind. But these guys have been relentless with the money, with the organization, to buy the seats, to gerrymander, to do whatever they got to do to get their control of the outcome. And now it's in a situation where it's not even hidden. It's completely blatant, the corruption, and for whom. I wonder if you can kind of distill that from where you're sitting and how that plays on a national scale.
I'm glad that you started with how Texas used to be and what Texas is now. Earlier, I mentioned there are a lot of paper tigers out there. There is a reality to the Texas braggadocio. People that live in this is a big, huge, expansive state. By definition, living in a state like this, you have to be that kind of a person that's willing to go out there. That's why we have the NATSA. That's why we have the oil production. And I know for those of us that are progressives, we want to get off of fossil fuel, but it took strong people to go ahead and find oil and drill. Oil brought Texas to the strength, the ganado, the kind of cattle ranching, all these kinds of things. That's Texas. And these were people that were strong, people that were out there doing things. Everybody. And when I say everybody, I'm talking about all ethnicities. We can talk about the political, racist stuff, the political, all of that is true. But you know what? You get into Timbuktu, Texas, and you have all these people working together, physical, mental, they're doing things. What we got now is a bunch of paper tigers that are not producing anything. They're not building on the strength on their own strength. They're not being the productive people that they are. They're being exactly what you said, fraudsters. And you talk a whole lot about that in your documentary, The Con. These are people now that don't produce anything. They're working off of what everybody else has produced and doing things in a manner that is very fraudulent. If you take a look at the redistricting that they're attempting, a lot of folks like to call the redistricting a racist endeavor. It ultimately it's going to look that way, but ultimately it's a power play to get something for nothing. It's a power play to go out there and win at all costs, even if you don't have the mental acuity capacity to win. When we have Abbott and Patrick and Paxton, the three musketeers here in Texas that run everything, these are incompetent, for lack of a better word, these are incompetent buffoons with a strong lack of intellect. One is a radio show host. One is a corrupt attorney. The other one is a governor who, sorry that he got injured, but when he got injured, he made sure to have he used the laws to make a whole lot of money. And then when he became governor, he denied others the ability to get the recompense that they deserve. These are people that are crooks, and the policies that they're passing, from redistricting to women's rights, taking women's rights away, to taking people's ability to get health care. What they're doing is something that needs to be fight for. A lot of folks who say, well, why are you there in Texas? There are two options. I am a Texan now. I'm a Panamanian turned Texan, and I adapted a lot of what Texas used to mean. and we fight, and we don't give in, and we don't give up.
That is so inspiring me, to Egberto. And you live that every day. And your thought process and your podcast and the information that you espouse is extremely important. I encourage everybody who comes across this to please discover Egberto if you haven't obviously already. But to your point, what you really tapped into is what I was going for. Okay, because the super rich of the state of Texas symbolize and exemplify exactly what the rest of the country has become, in my opinion, from this perspective, right?
Yes.
They find idiots to do their bidding. They find stupid whisperers. Okay, so to your point, they're all incompetent. They share that. And they've got that way through extraction and fraud, lying, stealing, and cheating. And quite frankly, they have zero character. Right? They're just the opposite. I like to use this phrase sometimes when I'm speaking freely, but I might as well use this. I mean, our country is a rotting dead whale carcass of the dead whale of the American dream, where only pimps, whores, junkies, and parasites are thriving because of this situation. Because the billionaires spend the money for the idiot whisperers to go into the mega churches, and then they use this sort of extrapolation of like the prosperity gospel. Look at this preacher that flies around on his, Gulfstream jet. He fills up auditoriums. Really, they're all there to grift on each other, to be quite frank with you. But there's also this sort of culture of patriarchal, do as we say, top down. Everybody gets in the fray. Everybody is, quite frankly, on the menu, I think, in terms of predation, right? And there's a hierarchy to that, but everybody plays a role culturally because we're humans and people tend to socialize, and that particular side of our history in the United States has always been there. But you throw in money, and that's God. That's literally their God. They pretend it's Jesus. They pretend it's all of these moral, scenarios, but BS. It's the prosperity gospel that's predicated on fraud. And we've seen this stuff since the 80s. I mean, I think back to Tammy and, right. And all of the cheating and the lying and the deception and all of these things. And then, of course, you add on top of that, this horrible nature of predation, that we see play out with Epstein. Now, Epstein's a different version of this, but I find it ironic that we have a president who was a 34 convicted felon that we know has, basically literally raped. I mean, that's, in the case of Eugene Carroll, right? Because of the legal interpretation of what he actually did. Convicted. I mean, and we can let our imaginations go wild, but he's cheated all of his employees his entire career. He's been involved with racketeering. He's cheated his clients. He's cheated his customers. His entire life is a lie. And he got elevated on the backs of this sort of this mega merger between the uber religious sect that are lying to themselves through this sort of hypocrisy, and we could go on and on and on. But when I grew up in Texas, for example, and I'll use this as a jumping off point, one thing that always really kind of blew my mind, right, was that we had these counties where there were these blue laws where you couldn't drink liquor on a Sunday. And they were uber religious, and they were right on the border of this honky tonk filled with outlaws and strip clubs and fireworks and alcohol and you name it. And what I would see with my own eyes is dudes would go back and forth, depending on where they were in their life, between the honky tonks and the church to get redemption, right? Or salvation. And I always kind of laughed at it. And I'm like, okay, let your freak flag fly. Just like it doesn't matter what your lifestyle is as an American, I'm always like, okay, but what they became was a political force. And the likes of Abbott and the rest of the guys that you talked about, they've created that mega merger, have they not? And ultimately, if I could get your commentary of what that feels like, particularly when you so brilliantly and inspired me to remember that, no, the strength of Texas is that independence and that anything can be done spirit that you bring to the table that you're fighting to get back.
Yeah, you knock on something that I think has been really the detriment of Texas, and you name it, about the hypocrisy of having the blue laws. You can't buy liquor on Sunday, but the bars, etc., were open the night before and all. I mean, it is amazing that all of that happens. Now, I'd like your audience to consider looking at a documentary called God Forbid on Hulu. And it talks about the involvement of Jerry Falwell's son, Jerry Falwell Jr., his wife, and a 21-year-old concubine that they put together and bought a hotel for, and he got into trouble. But in effect, the the tenet was Jerry Falwell was pretty much blackmailed into supporting Donald Trump because pretty much, I'm saying that is the inference that they're making, because pretty much his behavior, the Falwell's behavior was pretty much darn close to Donald Trump. But while Donald Trump had license to behave that way, it doesn't fly well with Liberty University and these other places for there to be Trump-like behavior sexually in that in that church. So I mean, I think it's a documentary one can see because it details the hypocrisy and the fallacy of what's happening in our society today. You talk about the people who are one of the things that I think is bringing down most of the red states, believe it or not, is the church. And I mean it in this regards. And by the way, my wife is a deacon. My daughter's very strong in the church. So I'm not trying to hit the church too hard. But let me tell you what's happening, right? The structure of a church is that the pastor, the shepherd, has divine connection with God, and his flock follows him. And that's why politicians have gone the easy way. America has always liked to profess democracy in the United States, but they love dictatorships around the world. Because if they need to deal with Panama, they deal with Manuel Antonio Noriega. If they want to deal with Haiti, they deal with Baby Doc. If they want to deal with Nicaragua, they deal with Somoza. That is how they figure. That's why they supported all these guys. They only need to deal with one, and he imposes the will of extraction for the Americans, for the West. So they love that. And what they found is in our churches now, in America, we can't control progressives that way. These guys are crazy. These guys are out there. They think, they believe in critical thinking. So we can't do that with progressive. But if we tie religiosity, if we tie the identity politics, if we tie these three things together, we can inch up to 48, 49% of the country, and then we can do some foolery for the other 2%. In a direct country, we can win elections. And that is what they do. The shepherd, the pastor becomes Somoza, Manuel Antonio Noriega, and all these other dictators. These are who the pastors become. And the Trump gets to pay off all the pastors for their support. The pastors goes and tell his congregation, those progressives are evil. They are the scum of the earth. You must support this man that has 3 baby mamas with 5 different kids. You must support this guy that grabs women by their you-know-what. You must do all these things because, after all, then we have a few kings in the Bible that weren't all that good either. So it's not all that bad that Jesus and God sent us Donald Trump. So pastors, do your job.
Okay, that was brilliant. And then there's the other side too, right? Because this is where it foments and this is how it goes. And this is what I've watched, my entire life. And I kept scratching my head about it. But on the other side of the coin, we had experiments in South America, particularly in Chile and also in Argentina, particularly through in Argentina.
The Chicago
right?
Boys. Yeah.
The Chicago Boys, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got this Friedman scenario to privatize everything. Mm-hmm. And so you control the masses with religion, which is really, in many ways, outside of the ardent believers and the spirituality and the wonderful things that can come from someone's own journey and all of the things that come that help us navigate this difficult life, right? Depending on where we're born, especially. But the nature of the economics of it is the experiment was to privatize, use the church to basically shepherd the flock, and then create these hierarchies, like you said, to have them in our sphere. That was, the next version of what I guess it was Roosevelt that would carry the big stick, right? When we first did the Panama Canal and then onward and upwards in the Western Hemisphere, which we're seeing. And we saw from the beginning of Donald Trump 2.0, obviously why we at the Gulf of America, and then the Panama Canal and BlackRock, which is behind there. And then, of course, all things Canada and the rest of it. Okay, so this is like, we're going to break up these spheres of regional influence. And, Putin, we'll talk about, which you you can have in Ukraine and Europe, and we'll have this and yada, yada, yada. But yet the Saudis, of course, which are always connected to Houston, that just kind of pilfered in my mind, but that's not where the analogy that I'm trying to go with, my religious theocracy. But the fact is that this is a very sophisticated approach, right? When you have, and especially, let's think about this now that we're seeing the universities bend the knee, right? So when we see these Ivy League, and by the way, I've never heard anything about Rice University. Has Rice University even, I guess it's private, isn't it?
It's a private, Rice is a private university. Now, even private universities, Harvard is private also.
Sure.
They do get government funding in some form of the
Research.
other, but remember, Rice is in Texas.
Right.
A red state.
Oh, yeah. Right. Okay, that's that. Okay, so perfect, right? But again, I mean, just a quick sidebar is that, what we're discovering in these Ivy League schools, because corporate America has destroyed research and development, we've relied on our institutions of education to do it, higher education. And of course, the Ivy League with Harvard and Princeton and Yale and Columbia and yada, 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 they rely on billions from the federal government. And so it was news to me, and when you think about these technocrats, but they're the same types of people, right? They emanate from the Koch brothers, the vertical that have been around since the Heritage Foundation. They've been out this forever, unless we forget that Fred Koch, father of Charles and David Koch, actually built the infrastructure for Stalin's, infrastructure. Yes. And the learning went both way, right? Because when I saw a thumbnail today of Trump, because of the investment in Intel, that we're looking at the Politburo, right? That it's the state that's investing in central planning. So it is corporate communism or corporate fascism, depending on how you want to look at it.
Exactly. I wrote an article on that. I call it Mao Trump.
I got to read that. I'll look it up and let's put it in there. But to finish my thought on this, what we're in the midst of is my whole life in process, right? Because they offshored this stuff. We end up with the neoliberalism. We end up with NAFTA. This goes through many, many different administrations. And what we did, because of the middleman play of the Americans as the financial sort of vector, right? Because Wall Street is this profit motive machine that ultimately, because of all of these contracts, offshores and outsources what was once this productive capacity that, of course, Trump says we're going to bring back with tariffs, which is just lining his own pocket. But at the same time, what we're looking at, and this is what I want to get you to comment on, you're looking at a highly sophisticated group of very committed, vicious, deeply immersed geniuses of technocracy that are working one side of the fence to create the situation that enabled Trump to steal the presidency and however that worked out, but to get us Doge and all of these things because of what? They took over the Supreme Court, right? And we could go on and on from there. But that's kind of an introduction of what I'm looking at from my side, which is all undergirded by fraud. How do you respond to that in terms of what you view? And I guess take it to what you would like to see the response to turn the tables on that which is destroying us.
First of all, I want to answer it this way. Patrick, please keep the pressure on. Your work is extremely important. And here's what I'm going to talk about in response to that. You mentioned tariffs. This is important. You mentioned tariffs. I want you to understand what's going on here. Donald, as everybody that's listening to us right now, tariffs are not paid by the foreign countries. Tariffs are paid by Americans, and it's a regressive tax, because no matter who you are, you pay the same amount based on whatever the tariff is. So you, American people, for every country that Trump applies a tariff, you pay. When he talks about all these billions of dollars that's coming into the coffers, that is a tax that you are paying. He doesn't call it a tax, so it doesn't look like he raised taxes, but it's a tax on you. Why am I stressing this? Because what Trump is putting in the narrative every time he talks, I am bringing in billions of dollars into the treasury, and those foreign countries that we are taxing, those foreign countries that we're putting a tariff on are paying. China is paying. Europe is paying. And we can smile and laugh at it, my brother. But here's the problem. The problem is the American people, because he repeats it all of the times, and because every time he says it, there isn't 10 of us saying, no, it's a tax on you. You are paying it. Eventually, what is going to metastasize in the psyche of Americans is that Trump brought in a lot of money into the treasury from all these foreign countries that were taking advantage of us. It's false. You are the one Trump is getting the money from, and it's going to reflect itself in lack of economic activity. Okay, I wanted to point that out first of all. But secondly, I think it is important for us to understand that this is a big fraud, as you've mentioned all of the times, Patrick. And that is because the reason you want to apply tariffs is you do want prices to go up. When you apply a tariff, you want those prices to go up so that in your local economy, the things that you used to buy from overseas can be competitive now that you have a tax on that system. So a car that costs China $50 that you can only sell for $100 here, you put 100% tariff on that car. Now it's competitive with a Ford car. So you want the prices to go up to build your industry up. So when Donald Trump tells you he's applying a tariff and the prices won't go up, if the prices don't go up, then the tariff isn't working, because the idea behind the tariff is to create your own businesses to build those products. So that's the second item. So it is a complete theft. You speak in the con, you spoke so very eloquently about the fraud in the mortgage industry that affect people who bought mortgages or who had mortgages. The fraud that Donald Trump is putting on, and we're not even talking about crypto yet, the fraud that he's putting on with the tariffs, both the narrative that he's trying to get out there, but this fraud, as opposed to just working on people that you support, the mortgage holders, this is a fraud on everybody, because everybody shops at Walmart. Everybody buys a burger. Everybody buys a car. So this fraud that he's implementing right now is costing all of us. The fraud that our brother here, Patrick, speaks on in The Con. And by the way, you got to watch The Con, guys. Watch that series, The Con. I learned a lot from watching The Con. Let me tell you guys, the thing is this, that fraud that Trump is applying right now, unlike what Brother Patrick speaks about in The Con, affects everybody.
Well, and to that point too, because I know I asked you a long compounded question, which I'm guilty of a lot of times, but I know you're a very smart guy and you can do it. And I want you to try to tie this part together, because the fraud is global. So Don the Con Rico Pig, that I like to call him, hashtag Don Rico Pig, because the entire government is a racketeering enterprise. Because of our work in the Con, I've become quite, educated on predicate acts of a racketeering enterprise. And if I had the resources, I could probably find hundreds, if not thousands, of predicate acts every day in this administration. It's extraordinary, not to mention what SCOTUS is involved with, Pam Bondi's Department of Justice, what's going on with Kash Patel and the FBI. It's incredible. It's beyond comprehension that this is where we are. Again, my mind coming from the 70s is a National Lampoon satire that would have created back in our days, like Animal House and everything else. And that's what our society has become, the naked gun presidency. But it's not funny, because people are going to suffer, and of course are suffering. And in the process, we're throwing out due process. We're throwing out, really the entire law is dead. It's a lawless society. And we're seeing today, and I want to ask you this question and I'll circle back to the other stuff, but Abrego Garcia, we're starting to see, comment on what you're seeing in the developments there because of what's going on.
This is creepy. They are blackmailing this guy into pleading guilty to save face for a mistake the Trump administration made by calling this guy a trafficker. And what they're holding over his head is, go to Costa Rica. If you don't go to Costa Rica, we are deporting you. Plead guilty and we'll send you to Costa Rica. If you fight this in court, we're going to send you to Uganda. No trial, no nothing. I mean, this is evil. This is actually, and I don't know the statute, but I think this is against international law as well. It's a shame.
Right. Well, I mean, but to that point too, I mean, talking about corruption, see, what I've always said, because of what our work, revealed to me and to us, and then we got quashed, and then I've got hundreds of hours on the shelf. But what I've been trying to get through to the American consciousness for now years is that corruption creates fascism. That's the way it's always been. Now, obviously, fascism is a terminology that we associate from the 30s onward, but tyranny has been around for 1,000 years, maybe more, and it's always the same sort of dynamic, right? You get the complicity of the control of the powerful, and then you rape and pillage everyone else, and then you can do these illegal things, which was the whole purpose of the United States to begin with, is to push back with Bill of Rights and, obviously the Constitution that protects us from this sort of, which is just an abomination to what the United States is. But to this point right right, that you just made, think about ICE, right? Behind masks, young men that they're now going to be an agency that's got more funding than the FBI, maybe more than the CIA, who knows, because of black budgets and all that.
Let me just interrupt a second. More funding than the next. I mean, only 3 armies, only 3 military budgets in the world is larger than what we are given to ICE. Just think about that.
And to be what it looks like to me, a personal security force / muscle, some people like to call it the Gestapo. I don't think they're quite there yet, but a paramilitary force at least, right? And you come from Panama, and you've seen this throughout. I think about Contragate as kind of the beginning of all of this stuff, all emanating from Central America. But all of this in service to a 6-time deferred a guy who completely lied to get out of his military service. Maybe it was the opposite. It's 5-time deferment, 6 bankruptcies, almost a 7th because of what didn't happen with Letitia James. And of course, they just got rid of the $450 million fine. This guy's pocketed over $5 billion that we know of in terms of all of these things happening with crypto and backdoor scenarios. The corruption is absolutely insane. This guy is the motherlode of corruption that is now using the United States, our taxes, to fund a fascist military arm to basically destroy the law, right? Please, you come from Panama. You lived in the region. Tell the American people what happens if millions of us don't rise to the moment to turn the tables on this madness.
Look, the guy is telling us what he's doing. He's not hiding it. We are currently ceding this country to Donald Trump to convert it into a fascist country. And if we don't react now, it will be very difficult to climb out of it. Look, we will climb out of it, no doubt. But it'll be that much more difficult to climb out of. I wrote a piece over the weekend that I just want to mention a few things, a few points, because if you remember, they invaded they're searching Bolton's home on Friday, and mainstream media spent the entire 24 hours with B-rolls just talking about Bolton's home being searched. There's a lot of other stuff happening, Patrick. There's a lot of more important stuff happening, Patrick. But we were focused on that. That's all these guys know how to do. Focus on one thing that Donald Trump uses to move our heads away. Now, getting back to the subject at hand, Donald Trump is making a $200 million improvement onto the White House for a golden ballroom. He's modifying a 747 to make it a luxury Air Force One. He's also doing many other things like what he's doing with the Justice Department, etc. He is not. A lot of people don't want to believe that this guy is setting up for a 3rd term. But everything that he does, because none of this come to fruition till near the end of his term, will. If you don't understand that this guy is putting the military in the streets to get us used to having military in the streets, paramilitary, as you mentioned before, like we had in Panama during Manuel Antonio Noriega. If you don't understand that going into democratic only cities is a means of giving legitimacy to his fascism by depressing the vote in blue areas, so that yes, when the vote comes for can he run for a 3rd term, and the Supreme Court says, well, yes, and they find some loophole to do it. Look, the Constitution has a lot of things that people think are very airtight that aren't. People say birthright citizenship is airtight. I'm a naturalized American citizen. I am scared to death, because if the Supreme Court decides to forget about literal interpretation of the Constitution and say, you know what? That birthright citizenship and absolute citizenship was really meant for slaves or the enslaved. So therefore, the rights, we don't really need to accept the rights for others. There is a lot there. If people don't understand the elasticity of the Constitution, I mean, there was once a time that the conservatives believed in originalist theory and believed in I forgot how they named it, reading the Constitution literally. Not anymore. Not anymore. So I can foresee that Donald Trump is building the case for a 3rd term based on what he's doing, the airline, the boots on the ground, the ballroom, because why do you need a ballroom that big? No other president wanted a big ballroom, but you like that kind of stuff. But you won't be able to enjoy that kind of stuff because the ballroom won't be ready until you're about out of office. Why would you do all of this if you're not going to make the try? Why do you send pizza boxes to judges to put them in fear? Why do you do all these things to put your judges in fear? Why do you get a Congress that is so sycophantic towards you that even as they know, they voted for the big bad bill, a bill they know are going to harm people, and a bill they know will hurt the people in their own communities, and they still supported that? Why would they do that if you have a president that is really on his last term? What do you call that phrase? Is it lame duck president? If he's really a lame duck president, you have no fear. So folks, read between the lines. The fight is not what we think the fight is. And unless we see what the fight really is, we're going to fail in the short term.
Well, and that's what our work, The Con, taught me, right? I literally had to go on a mission because mainstream media didn't tell me what I was experiencing. And suddenly I started pulling the threads, and it led to the revelation of the largest racketeering enterprise in history that never ended. And I'll say this in terms of, my perspective, and I hope that you can comment on this. And we got another 20 minutes here, and then unless you need to jump early, but
no, that's fine.
I'm so fascinated by your points. They're incredible, my friend. But so I'm born in the late 60s. I'm born in 68. Obviously, that's a tragic year. A lot of things have taken place. Mm-hmm. It's a big pivotal year. But I grew up kind of, again, in the 70s, in the 80s particularly. I know all of the things that were taking place, but I always had kind of an understanding of satire. You know what I mean? Bugs Bunny was what I grew up with, the cartoons as a child. And we always looked at power through the lens of Bugs Bunny, kind of just pulling one over on these guys that were trying to force Bugs. I mean, it was just this American sort of dynamic to be able to be like, I know what the hell's going on here, and I'm going to run circles around you, not the other way around. It was a competitive dynamism is kind of what I'm trying to get at. But when you look back through American history, right, and we all know that people are flawed and nothing is ever perfect, and that we can always, rain criticism for every particular, part of our history. But this is the lens I want to offer for this dialogue in terms of where we are. So obviously, the American Constitution has what Martin Luther King would later say, I just want us to live up to what we live true to what we put on paper. But ultimately, we know that there was the 3/5 statute and then all of the federalism and then all of the negotiations that would enable slavery. But the other side of it is that there was this expansiveness, right? And so the expansiveness goes after Native Americans down south, after we purchase the Louisiana Purchase was the greatest purchase, quite frankly, in history. But the forces moving west and, the war with Mexico and everything that elicits for the state of Texas. But what you really kind of look at when you read between the lines, especially when you know the history, is quite frankly what history always teaches us, right? Right makes might. Right. And I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's history. Right. And so what I think these technocrats with the backing of the billionaires that came out of course, the influence of Stalin and all of the other kind of history that goes with it, they've gotten to the point now where they've said, in my mind, because the billionaire ownership of what they've been able to, press against the law and get away with so much of corruption that would then infuse trillions of dollars illegally into the pockets of the guys who have all the power, that they could double down and control the system even further, whether it's media because they own it all, or whether it's the judiciary. And we could go on about that with specificity. But I think with the second incarnation of Trump V2, right, is this thing where it's like all bets are off. It's like, it's naked. We're going to do what we're going to do. We're going to force you into submission. You will not be able to stop us. We're going to flood the zone. We're going to put our military in, like you said, the what do we call them in the democratic cities that have safe haven for immigrants? What are
Yeah, I know what you mean. Sanctuary cities and so forth. So it's right, because we're not seeing those in Texas and Houston and so on and so forth, right? Which I guess they consider a bastion of what actually their power emanates from, right? So here's the logistics of the question. We, the people that believe in liberty and justice for all, have a vehicle in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is a big tent, and the big tent has different versions of effectiveness. We're seeing, obviously, Governor Newsom, Governor Pritzker,
Governor Abbott, not Abbott, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Yeah, right. And the other big states, pushing back in the way that they're going to, but then you start to see like Missouri and some of the others that could pop up that could maybe really screw up the Electoral College. But all that being said, there's one dimension that I continue to have a major problem with that I want you to address. The kleptocrats, the big money, have complete control over both parties. Now, are there a difference between billionaires that might run with Governor Pritzker that are different than, let's say, the Koch brothers that created they're different. They've got different initiatives and everything else, but they're still the kleptocrats. I'm curious how you resolve this scenario, given where we are in the spectrum, especially since your upbringing and who you are and coming from Panama, knowing what, the royal elite can do. Where's your head in terms of where the zeitgeist of the Democratic Party needs to be, and what gives you hope and what gives you the opposite?
Let me first address the first thing that you talk about might makes right. Okay. And you mentioned that earlier. Let's come to the reality that we have made the Constitution do whatever we needed it to do, to take and to do whatever we needed to do. When we ceded land to imagine I'm saying this, when we ceded land to the natives, when we found resources in the Black Rock and in the Black Mountains, we went ahead and we went against our treaties. There's never a treaty that we have actually lived up to. We signed a treaty as recently as with Iran, and of course we broke out of the treaty. So America only follows treaties as long as it is in our, as long as we like what's going on. Thereafter, we will simply ignore treaties. That's who we are.
That's for the billionaire class, those who are the people in control of those mechanisms. Yeah,
exactly. That's who we are. So when we get that part out of the way, with respect to the Democratic Party, what I tell folks all of the times is we are in a duopoly. Unfortunately, we're in a duopoly. And the only party right now where we can have some power is and when I say we, I'm talking about the freedom lovers, the people who want good values for the American people, is within the Democratic Party. But as you quite eloquently point out, the kleptocrats are funding both parties. But they're not funding Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They're not funding Maxwell. They're not funding Lee from Pennsylvania. They're not funding a lot of these folks that we have actually seen win. They didn't fund the judge who won in Wisconsin. So here's what I'm trying to say. Our main goal right now is to build up worthiness in the average American citizen. The average American citizen had been beaten down. Also, the average American citizen have been indoctrinated. We have been led to believe that there's something special about billionaires. We look up at billionaires. We look up at multi-millionaires as if they have something that we don't. The reality is we have something they don't. They are exactly as Patrick defined them. Kleptocrats. Let me back up, and this is a lot of people are. I hope you take this right. First, let me tell you what I believe in. I believe in true free enterprise. That's what I believe in, with a strong social safety net. That ain't capitalism. Capitalism by design is an extractive system that abstracts evil. Good people form the part of our capitalist economy. And I'm going to go where I'm going. I just need to kind of break this down. Good people, your mother, your father, your brother who works for Exxon, Enron, all these other companies, good and bad. They are good people. They don't get it because we're indoctrinated and because capitalism abstracts evil. Capitalism abstracts that you can pay and afford gasoline because MBT is left in the ground, because a lot of damage is done to the air. Capitalism abstract that you don't have to see the rare earths that's being dug up by people that are enslaved. Capitalism abstract that the bauxite we're getting for aluminum throughout the world are pretty much done from people that, if you knew what they were doing, your mama, your daddy, your brother who works for these capitalist companies, if they understood what that was happening to get that, they would never be a part of it. It's a good abstracting thing. So what Brother Patrick, what we do is we have to remove that abstraction from our economic system and also remove the lie that the billionaires, who are nothing more than the kleptocrats that Patrick always talks about. We have to open the eyes of folks to let them realize that their money is actually yours. There's nothing called redistribution. redistribution. And we talk about redistribution. It's not redistribution. It's taking back what's yours. It's taking back what's yours because these people have made all their money on your intellect. They have made all their money on your know-how, even your janitor, your garbage man, all of these folks. We couldn't have a society without all of us. So why do we cede wealth to just a few?
Okay, I agree 99% with what you said, but I'm going to add this caveat. And I thought what you delivered was so eloquent and so brilliant and so inspiring yet again. And I agree with the idea of the enterprise with a social safety net. That's exactly where I come from as well, because I understand the power of who we are and the immensity of what we are and how you have to have a hybrid. And that's another conversation. We can talk about details in another day. But what I would offer, and I think you did a very good job doing it, is that we have to redefine what we think capitalism is, really, because we're not a capitalist country, is what I'm telling you. And this is where I disagree. Because of what my work that leads to what this is behind me, the Clean New Deal that comes from the con, is we have a kleptocracy that controls the system that, to your point, extracts, but through theft, which is criminal on the books, which is why corruption creates fascism. Now, the ins and outs of what we discovered, of course, which I've said to you on several occasions, which is, my friends, this entire system was bankrupt in 2009. It choked on its own poison because it created through what we call control fraud, but just massive racketeering, theft after theft after theft, and all the different arteries of what makes up the housing system. And by the way, all commodities at this stage of the game play by the same rules, especially when you can create fraud, which is illegal theft by deception, through all myriad of what Donald Trump's done his whole career, which he lies, denies, switches the blame, and implicates, which is a falsification presidency. The guy's a Rico clown. Again, remember, Donald, let's see, what did I say? Let's see, it'll come back to me. Rico Pig, Don the Con.
You had a good phrase, man.
Don the Con, Rico Pig. Don the Con, Rico Pig. But what people have to understand, literally, that, and what I show you in all of our work is that the system was able to backdoor itself through the Federal Reserve illegally because of the statutes and what's been on the board since, and we could talk about economics and fiat currency and yada, yada, yada. But they literally gave themselves, through 3 presidencies, north of $71 trillion since 2009. We have a GDP of 25 trillion, which is 300 and some odd million people, full, scope of goods and services in the entire economy. I think the financial system of the billionaire class, the private equity, hedge fund, so forth, roughly 300,000 people that got $71 trillion to basically destroy this country. And so we don't have time to go through the whole Clean New Deal right now, and hopefully we can save that for a later date. But I want to just maybe introduce this part to get your final closing comments on this, because I know you won't argue with it, but at the same time, I'm curious how you extrapolate it. So what we're talking about is a perversion of power, right? We're talking about an inversion of facade, the kinds of things like if you go to church and you believe in God and you believe in the precepts of God, but if your actions aren't aligned with your principles, you're in disarray. That's what this whole system does through deception. Okay. And deception, to stay within the biblical reference, is the work of the devil, right? For all of those who believe in, the kinds of things that lead to Armageddon and the rapture and all that kind of stuff. But what we have uncovered, and these are the questions that I think of as a Rubik's Cube, and you're an engineer and you know how to do all of those sorts of problem solving. There's 4 things that exist that fully reveal who we are. We've got qualified immunity, which means that police can shoot with impunity whoever they want and be above the law. There's reasons for that, but that's a major problem, especially when you're thinking about ICE and martial law. Second of all, we've got judicial immunity. So those in the Supreme Court can act with absolute impunity while corrupting everything that this country has stood for 248 years through a literal backdoor at the Supreme Court. There was $1.5 billion of influence that came through Leonard Leo and the whole, cabal of those types of guys to create Dobbs, and I could go on. They then enabled the executive president, or not the executive, the unitary, or we'll call it the imperial presidency, right? The president is above the law. So if the president is above the law, that makes him a king. And then how do you do it? This takes us to the beginning of our conversation, the Electoral College, which is ruled by the minority because of gerrymandering. Okay. So how do you unpack that just based on where you're sitting in 5 minutes?
All right. Let me just say, first of all, For the commentary that I made before, I don't think I read all your stuff. I've watched all of your stuff. I don't think it is in conflict at all with what you said. And you mentioned it depends on the definition of capitalism. My definition of capitalism is what we have today. That's called capitalism. I know your definition, but it has to be different because you do believe in capitalism, and
I believe in entrepreneurialism. I believe in capitalism. That's different, and I believe in Philonite. Go ahead.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that definitions are a thing, right? And I can bet when you define your capitalism, I'm going to say, wait a minute, that's free enterprise is what I'm talking about, brother. So I don't want there to be semantic issues here. I read your stuff. I listen to your stuff, and there's nothing in your stuff that I can possibly disagree with, nor that I think is in conflict with what I said before.
Right on.
Okay. So I just want to clear that point up, first of all. Now, secondly, as far as
perversion of power
and the Electoral College itself, I don't think we have the solution to that until we complete what I said before. And that is, we have to treat people like human beings, and that are like human beings that can think. We have to start introducing people to critical thinking, because as a democracy, it is the people are going to be the ones who decide if we cede our freedom to the Trumps, to the plutocrats, the kleptocrats, the billionaires, or we are going to finally hold the bull by the horns and take it back. In this country, we've had to do that several times in some form or the other. I am positive that if your message can go out, if our message can go out, that we can actually overcome this peacefully by making folks think critically. And that's all I think it's about. Letting people ask the question, why is it that we allow this? And when I'm talking about the current state, the current capitalism that we implement on my show, I tell people, just ask your question. Ask the question, why do you do all the work? Why do you build the skyscrapers that you can't go into? Why do you build the gated communities that you will never live in, that you'd never live in? Why do we do all these things? We are the intellect. We are the ones that do the work. To have a few take advantage of it, your worth is no different than theirs. You bleed red like everybody else. You think like everybody else. You speak like everybody else. We gotta come to the realization that no, it is us.
You're incredibly inspiring. Just a quick caveat to close it out. In terms of capitalism and the definition, what I'm saying is that capitalism requires risk reward. The system that we're showing you is that it's guaranteed, and that makes, the polite gesture of those in the financial community called it moral hazard. Mm-hmm. They destroyed the world and call it moral hazard. That's who these guys are. They're financial terrorists, okay, who destroy freedom and liberty and justice for all. And on that note, I just want to say I'm so glad you exist in the world, my brother. You inspire me. I'm so grateful for your time this afternoon. Please, everybody, check out Egberto Willies on Politics Done Right. Anything else that you can plug at the moment?
Yes, I'd like you to visit my site, politicsdoneright.com/newsletter. Politicsdoneright.com, that's newsletters. You can find politicsdoneright.com/newsletter. You can find out all the articles that I write, etc. And I even carry some of Patrick's work, because Patrick does some great work as well.
Fantastic. And I'll include that in the description below. And please, everyone, if you can, watch thecon.tv, and also check out behind me, thecleannewdeal.org. You have a terrific day, Egberto. Thank you for your time. I look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you, my brother. All right, folks, I hope we barely made it, but I got to get out of here. I want to thank you all for listening. I want you to please remember when I go ahead and process this, please share it. Please also remember to become paid subscribers of Politics Done Right, or of Egberto Off the Record. If you have the wherewithal to do that, we can only survive and put this stuff out with your support. We cannot make it without you. So I ask kindly, una vez más, lo voy a preguntar. I want to ask you one more time to please go ahead and support us however you can. The link I'm going to put in both chats. politicsdoneright.com/newsletter. I'm putting it in both. politicsdoneright.com/newsletter. Thank you for listening. I've got to be out of here. Love you all. My name is Egberto Willies. This is Politics Done Right. And you guys know how I end this, baby. I am what?
All of our country's problems, from polarization to ignorance on domestic and international issues to a complete misunderstanding of our economic and healthcare systems, are a direct result of a derelict mainstream media that too often bend over backwards to support corporate or bought politicians' wants as opposed to the people's needs for real information to make their lives better. Independent media is the only solution to inform truthfully and factually. Why? Because our loyalties are to you, the ones who fund us with small dollar contributions and subscriptions. Please consider supporting our independent media platforms by subscribing to our Egberto Off the Record newsletter at politicsdoneright.com/newsletter. Again, that is politicsdoneright.com/newsletter. It's an investment that pays incalculable dividends.